Hello, welcome to this webinar where we discuss and find a solution to the question, can we build countries and nations that can withstand cyber attacks, pandemics and political shocks? I think it's a quite ambitious agenda to cover in just 1 hour. My name is Viljar Lubi, I'm Estonian ambassador in London, but we have a fantastic panel here, so the experts who can know all the answers. So my job is very easy, I only need to know the questions, but they need to know the answers. So without further ado, I actually would like to start this conversation and maybe have a first very pragmatic question to David Knott, who knows the British system very well. Estonia is a very small country. And we always say that Estonia can do things because we can be agile. UK is a much bigger country. When we talk about resilience, does size matter?
It's a difficult question to answer. My thoughts are threefold. So I think, does size matter to our supply chain? I think it does. However we build services, however independent we try to be, we're always dependent on our suppliers. The more we spend, the better deals we get. I think that's just true. And the more we can ask of them to build resilience into their system. So I think that does matter. Does it matter in terms of speed? I think it does matter, but the other way around. So I think you're right to say that smaller, agile organisations can move faster and make swifter change than bigger, slower organisations. And often speed is inversely correlated to size. So I think, and one of the challenges I've seen through my public sector and private sector career is organisations trying to grow to scale while preserving that agility. I think if you can preserve that agility, that's an enormously valuable thing. My last thought is that in many ways, actually, size doesn't matter because resilience and our ability the difficulty of achieving resilience is also strongly correlated to complexity. And complexity is not a function of size. Yeah, we're all nation states, we all provide a set of services to our citizens. Citizens have increasingly complex needs in an increasingly complex world. I don't think the size of a nation changes that complexity. It means we're all building complex, interconnected digital services. The way of building those in a way which withstands failure, attacks, and other shocks is a difficult problem. So I think at the end of the day, complexity determines our ability to be resilient. Complexity is the same for everybody.
Thank you, David. So that what we're gonna do next is that I ask every panelist to have a small presentation, maybe intro to the topic, 5 minutes each, and then it will be followed by discussion. So I try to provoke them so that at the end, we maybe can find the answer to the question, does size matter, or resilience is something that you don't even have a choice. Are you big or small? We have to build our resilience. So, Dr. David Knott, maybe I still come back to you as a first speaker. You can say from the British government point of view, how can we build resilience?
So thank you. So we laid out both the size of the challenge and our potential response in 2 documents we published earlier this year. So the first is called State of Digital Government Review. We undertook a deep and broad review of our position in digital across the entire UK public sector. And the second is a document we call the Blueprint for Modern Digital Government, which is setting out our strategy for what we're going to do next. I think it's fair to say the state of digital government is deliberately very honest, frank and quite stark. It lays out a huge number of challenges. We have big cyber issues, we have big legacy issues, we have big agility issues, we have big leadership issues, we have many, many issues. The blueprint tries to set out and say how we can move forward from that. But there's a common theme running between the two of them, which is digital services only work for the public if they can rely on them. And their ability to rely on them depends on our ability to deliver resilience. We see that there are 5 big challenges to achieving that. The first is, might sound paradoxical, we're going to deliberately make the problem worse. And what I mean by that is we think digital public services are good. We are currently at about 50% digitisation of our range of public services, and we're going to shoot for 100%. So that means that we will make more great digital services, but we'll also increase our digital dependence as a nation. It means that when those services are disrupted, the impact is much broader. Secondly, we're going to try and shift from siloed services which fit the structure of government to joined up services which fit citizens' lives. Again, that's a laudable goal, but it means we're going to make these services increasingly interdependent with each other, which means if something breaks, it potentially has a bigger knock-on effect. Third is, I mentioned complexity in my opening remarks. I think we already have a high degree of complexity. We see that the range of services we're going to offer are going to become more and more complex. We'll try and make them simple to citizens, be more complex behind the scenes. And technology itself is getting more complex. We're currently going through a revolution in AI. AI is great, creates more capability, adds another set of layers of technology on top of the stuff we already run. So it makes our stuff more complex. And as I said, I also mentioned supply chain. We're seeing that AI is disrupting the technology supply chain at the same time as that supply chain is undergoing lots of changes as well. As we move to big on-demand subscription-based services, we're seeing supply chains consolidate. We're seeing ourselves becoming more and more dependent on a relatively small number of providers, which means that I think it's right for us to ask how can we depend on those providers and be confident that we can deliver resilient services to our nation. And then the last point is what I've called evolving failure modes. And what I mean by that is, if you work in technology for a long time, you spend a lot of your time worrying about how things are going to go wrong. There are increasingly more ways of things to go wrong. Attackers are getting more and more sophisticated. We know that our own National Cybersecurity Centre repeatedly says that the threat environment is getting more and more hostile. At the same time, as we build in all those new technologies, there are more and more ways to go wrong. So we now have to worry, as well as a server failing or a piece of storage not being available, is my AI model behaving itself? So we have these key challenges. I think that I'm very glad we're having this conversation because we don't have these challenges alone in the UK. So part of what we set out in our blueprint is an approach to thinking through these challenges, trying to build in resilience from the ground up, to adopt an approach which I think we're going to start calling resilience by design, and making sure that we can build resilience into our systems from the outset rather than try and bolt it on afterwards.
Yes, and I think I can now skip half of what I wanted to say because David kind of said it all. But Estonia is 100% digitized, and we just concluded a kind of census of our digital public services, and there are about 900 of those in central government and about 200 plus in local municipalities additionally. And it's also a very integrated one. The picture to the right of the slide is not just an illustration, but it's an actual relationship graph about the interactions between the different information systems on our X-Road integrated middleware. And what it actually means is that we have, by becoming also a very digitized country, we have reached the state where you cannot really separate digital and non-digital anymore. The question about the resilience of a digital government is also a question of a resilience of the society overall. And there are always like the regular resilience issues like high availability and stability of the services, but our current geopolitical situation has of course been forcing our hand to start considering the next level of resilience questions, the overall disaster recovery questions. We have had our measures before. We've had our data embassy, where we actually store the key facts about the country required to operate to ensure the continuity of the country. But we intend to take one step further and ensure the capability to actually continue offering services even in the worst case scenarios when we don't have control over our country, physical control. And that brings in a bunch of totally new types of challenges. The overall thinking so far has been that a typical country, in the typical country, the safest place is within your borders. But due to the geographical position of Estonia, we can't really think that way. We need to extend the virtual part of the country beyond the geographical borders. And if you start considering the actual implementation of what you intend to do, then you end up also with a concept of a certain kind of a core or a backbone of a country. We have like 1,400 different registries. Maybe you don't need to keep them kind of running all, but you need to articulate what are the core services that needs to be up and running. I talked to a colleague in the banking, they are articulating minimum viable bank. Well, in the governmental question, it's minimum viable government. You need to actually figure out what's there and what you need to really secure. And once you start thinking along those directions, you also understand that you need to have different capabilities. There is like a new level of maturity you need to have in operations, in cyber, just to ensure that in the new situation, you ensure the stability of those services. And I would say that the overall supply chain management, third-party risk management are like the new core skills you need to have, because the new world is going to be very volatile. The environment is going to change, the technological environment is going to change, and you need to be on top of that. So this is where we're aiming for. Thank you.
Thank you. At the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, as the name suggests, we work across the globe, work in more than 40 countries, providing advice to political leaders. And I'd like to try and bring into this conversation, agreeing with every previous speaker, a little bit more of that global perspective, including from countries that are maybe less further ahead when it comes to their digital infrastructure than the UK and Estonia. I think the key point that we see in these discussions is that when we talk about resilience, especially when we talk about resilience in the age of AI, where supply chains are global by nature, we cannot talk about resilience in the context of just one country. It is a deeply geopolitical question, and is one that is bound up both with the external shocks and external events, but also with internal demands within different countries. Earlier this year, we carried out a public opinion poll in 5 high-income countries to try and understand what people expect from government. And in particular, we found that there is a real sense of pessimism, whether that's in the UK, in the US, in Australia or Canada, about government's ability to deliver. And from that point of view, the lack of state capacity is in itself a threat to resilience. More people in every one of those countries believe that their children will be worse off than they are today. And this is not ideological. This is based on their belief in the government's competence and government's ability to deliver. And what we now know is that in order to be able to deliver for citizens, governments do need to embrace digital services, whether that's to address the growing financial pressures that particularly high-income countries face, or whether that is to accelerate development where existing models of development are not producing results fast enough. However, as governments do move towards that greater state of digital government, and as that distinction becomes more and more meaningless, we need to understand that self-sufficiency when it comes to technology, when it comes to AI in particular, is not an option for the vast, vast majority of countries in the world. And therefore, whether they're thinking about compute, whether they're thinking about cloud infrastructure, whether they're thinking about the application layer of AI, they need to think about how the decisions they make about these technical issues actually affect their geopolitical position. This is especially the case given that when we think about digital public infrastructure, those building blocks of being able to deliver for citizens, those building blocks of state capacity and state resilience, this is increasingly becoming a tool of global influence, whether that is the India stack, whether that is the Estonia X-road. Countries see an advantage in being able to share their expertise, but also the technical solutions that they have built for their own states. And so that means that ultimately across the entire chain, there is a question of where are you comfortable being dependent on other countries' solutions, other organizations, private sector or public sector, and where do you feel the need for control? Now, this sovereignty conversation is, I think, very, very live, and I'm sure we'll cover it more in the discussion afterwards. But ultimately, political leaders face this choice of where do they want to exercise complete strategic independence and be a maker? Where do they want to exercise influence and be the mover and shaker of how a world or a particular geopolitical alliance tackles certain technical issues? And where are they comfortable with interdependence or even complete dependence because they feel that being dependent on a certain part of the value chain is ultimately not a threat to their state resilience. So this is the type of strategic approach that political leaders need to be taking today.
If I think through that, what has shaped our thinking in resilience as a wider topic, then two events come to my mind. First, in 2007, the first ever nationwide attack in cyberspace on a sovereign country in Estonia. So the scale of that attack today, the NATO's position is that the scale of that attack today would invoke Article 5. But back then, Estonia wasn't ready for this type of attack. And the next decades have been shaping the understanding that how to be ready, how to build resilience, both in the cyberspace, but also much wider, so that this would never happen again. And then, almost 15 years later, COVID hit. And that again shaped the understanding what resilience truly means. How in a crisis, how to assure the continuity of the government if, for example, the physical ways of working can no longer work. And there is actually, turns out that in our research, in our thinking and experience, turns out that assuring resilience in the cyberspace and assuring resilience in the physical domain in reality are the different sides of the same coin. Together with the Estonian government and Oxford, we also formulated a white paper on our thinking government resilience in the digital age, where we listed our key recommendations and findings. And the 5 essential recommendations is that, first of all, resilience, in building resilience, the digital first public service delivery strategy is essential. So, for example, in Europe, during the times of COVID, almost 30% of the governments in Europe had to postpone democratic elections. So, because of the social distancing rules and also because for government's own ability to conduct elections, democratic processes were put on hold. But in reality, in Estonia, only during the last election cycle, 51% of the government state elections are now digital. So we could also say that digital first approach to critical government services could also be considered as the most resilient way how to assure the longevity of our democracy, but also the critical public services. The second lesson learned is that other than citizen-facing digital public services, we often forget that civil servants are also affected by the crisis the same way as citizens. So especially what COVID taught us, that resilience also means building resilience for the civil servants. So remote first or remote enabled public sector jobs and also automation and so forth is essential to building government resilience, also from the civil service point of view. But of course, with this, we have to treat digital government almost as a critical infrastructure or something that assures overall that assures that digital government is not simply something that is a nice to have function, but is treated as an essential function of the government itself, without what the government simply cannot function or is threatened. And that means that we need to build redundancy to digital public infrastructure, like Madis earlier spoke, potentially in some countries beyond borders. This is much less of a problem for larger countries. But that requires us thinking that what in geopolitical dimensions requires what alliances are needed for us to build wider resilience also beyond considering the geopolitical realities. And this brings us to the topic of building digital sovereignty and making very smart decisions what type of alliances to build also in the technological realm. So that can translate into what are the different regulations needed to assure trust between the partners, or what type of technological dependencies are actually smart to either to outsource or to build in the sovereign soil itself, in order to also assure that there is a local ecosystem that can provide that resilience on the national domain as well. And it's really difficult to say what elements of this are truly working. And what we have found out is that organizations that have very successfully been building end-to-end resilience are the ones that run exercises, they test it. So the very good question always is that if we, in a perfect scenario, if we cut the electricity of the government organization and in essence try to mimic a large-scale crisis such as a COVID or a physical attack, nothing should actually happen. The organization should continue working, and because everything is digital, everything is automatic, and there are failovers. That would be the perfect scenario, which is also very realistic to actually achieve.
Thank you all. It's obvious that we are represented in the panel by people who know exactly what they're talking about. But still, I would like to, maybe put the pressure on you and ask, given we have two countries here represented, and we talk about resilience, and Andres said that resilience is a very wide concept, and also it's a resilience in the cyberspace, but also resilience in the physical space. And it's the same thing, but let's say the two sides of the same coin. So whenever, as a policymaker myself, I try to address the issue, I need to define what is the problem at stake. So do you think we understand actually what we are dealing with? What is resilience, what we're building on? Like some of you said also, is it only that we try to address existential risks or very severe risks, or resilience can be also much lighter things? So have we also agreed on a definition? David?
If I can have a go. So it's a really good question. I don't think we use the vocabulary completely consistently, to be honest. I try to, because I'm a technologist at heart, so I like precision and engineering, etc. I try to distinguish between two concepts, both of which I think matter, and both are things I think we should seek as government: reliability and resilience. So for me, reliability means, as a citizen, when I want to use a service, it is there, and I can rely on it to be available, and it behaves as normal. And from a technology point of view, that means that even if routine things go wrong, and as a technologist, things go wrong all the time, a server fails, a service fails, a piece of the network fails, the system is fault tolerant to those failures and it keeps on going. I distinguish that from resilience, which I regard as the ability to keep critical services running in the face of unexpected large shocks, so that when very unusual things happen, we can't necessarily keep absolutely everything running exactly as it would do on a normal day, but we can keep the essential things going. I think for me, the usefulness of distinguishing between those two things is, firstly, it allows people like me to engineer those different scenarios. Secondly, it forces us to think about, in the resilience scenario, what are those things that absolutely matter most to everybody that we absolutely must keep going? So I think it's a helpful distinction to make. I think we'd help ourselves if we were more precise about our vocabulary. Anybody else want to comment on this? Madis, please.
I could just add that, I think a large part of the risk management is our capabilities. It's not a concrete thing, but it's more like how you monitor, how you react, how you actual overall are able to react to different situations. Myself, I have a financial services background, and it's all about risk management, and it's always a risk is a function of probability and impact. And I think a lot of governmental kind of risk functions have been doing pretty well with a large number of different risks, but maybe what sometimes is being like not so much looked at is like those very large scale high or low probability, high impact risks. And I think our world has now gotten to the point when those are getting more into the focus, and this is what we're actually talking about here.
Alexander.
So I think it's worth distinguishing in a similar way to David's between the resilience or reliability of individual systems and the resilience of the system overall. And there is something to kind of the flip side of resilience, which is fragility. To me, a really key question here is how easy is it to make the system not work anymore? Is it going to fall over at a simple push? Yes. One system comes down, everything comes down. Or is it something that's more flexible and is able to adapt to changing circumstances over time? And from that point of view, I think where we sometimes can go wrong is not think about the cost of doing nothing. A lot of the resilience conversation, I think, to me, tends to focus on, are the systems we currently have resilient to shocks? Versus what does the overall system need to look like in order to be more resilient than what we have today?
I think about it in a practical terms that what's the cost of the worst that could happen? And different countries have a very different definition for that. For example, in countries like in Estonia, there is a constant existential threat from the East, in essence, that shapes the strategy and the thinking towards resilience, while in some other bigger countries, the threat in reality might be, for example, the resilience of democratic processes, the resilience of the supply chain, the resilience of to pandemics and so forth. So there is a slight difference in it, but there are common denominators in this. That I think that actually the solutions to those are very similar, while the specific nature of the threat that requires resilience in order to adapt into might be different. But rather, the common denominator is on the solution side.
I agree that maybe it's very difficult to have one definition only. It is a bit a fluid concept. But still, if we have still understanding what we're talking about, then obviously the next question always is how and who should address this? So the next question I would like to propose is, who is responsible? Because I think, is it specialized people like you, or is it everybody? Because when we all remember pandemic, then it was both. Probably everybody was looking up to the government, said, you need to be, let's say, ready. At the same time, we knew that we also can do each one of us something as well. So who is responsible for building resilience?
I can have a go. And again, I think it's going to be a slightly variable answer. And I'm going to draw on, so like Madis, I have a financial services background. And in there, by regulation, it was relatively clear, individual institutions were responsible for the resilience, and the CEO of the company was responsible to shareholders and customers and regulators for doing that. And we used to say, the technology people are here to provide a service, it's the business owner who's really responsible. I think actually it's more of a double act than that. I think we have to recognise that we are building a world which is increasingly dependent on deeply complex systems, which is unreasonable to expect anybody without a technical background to deeply understand. So I think it's part of our job, because my job as CTO, to put on the table, these are the kind of risks we're running, these are the kind of measures we can take, these are the choices that we can make. And then I think it's the people who deliver those services, depending on the type of service, it might be our heads of department, it might be political decisions for ministers to make those choices. But I think there's a huge onus on us to make sure those implications and choices are really explicit, and that we're helping people to understand and make good choices in a, say, really, really complex environment.
I mean, I think the quick answer is that everybody is. I mean, it's the job of the experts to explain and to raise the issues, but in a way, at the end of the day, it's the policymakers, the decision makers who actually have the final call. Because at the end of the day, you can also accept the risk. You say that I know, I'm fine. So if a technology leader has not raised issues, he hasn't done his job. But if he has, and there hasn't been a decision made, then it's the policymaker's problem that things haven't been addressed.
I think there's a responsibility and accountability issue here.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the job of government is to keep people safe. That is the fundamental, paramount job of every political leader. And resilience is to a very large degree, especially where countries do face these very real threats, is about keeping people safe. So the buck stops, if you will, with the political leader. Now, they may not have the technical knowledge and understanding to kind of go 3 layers deep into the systems and understand where the choke points are. But they need to understand that these decisions, which appear technical on the surface, are actually geopolitical, are actually going to have a massive influence on the resilience of the system or the systems. And I think it is their responsibility to understand where that's the case. And then, as Madis says, maybe sometimes they say, we're okay with this risk, but we are providing the guidelines, we're making those decisions, and we're taking accountability for them.
I think institutionally speaking, this resilience itself is probably one of the most, topics that requires a whole of government approach. So typically governments that successfully implement resilience strategies, they implement it for example, from a Prime Minister's bureau and down. So this is a end-to-end type of strategy topic that requires rolling it out through the entire government, that requires centralized strategies, and approaching this almost a similar way, for example, how governments have set national agenda on digitalization or something similar. So it's a very end-to-end topic.
Thank you so much. And I would like to continue a bit on this topic as well. David, what you said in your introductory remarks, you said that the services need to be reliable, or we need to rely. So if we talk about reliability, at least for me, there are extremely many layers. Convenience, trust, that is transparency, quality of the service, so on. So how much this should be open to the public conversation? What I mean by that as well, that it was said that Estonia probably was the first country that had a full cyber attack in 2007. Now, everybody spoke about that. The world was different. We were not as prepared as we are right now. Currently, that we don't speak about, that what's happening in cyberspace, in Estonia, in the UK, and so on. I mean, the cyber attacks happening on a daily basis, but we don't talk about that. Should we talk about that? Should the wider public know about that and also understand what is at stake? And also, we should explain more how we address those concerns, because by doing that, we also educate the public.
So my view is yes, we should say more. I referenced our blueprint for modern digital government earlier on. One of the 6 points, some of the actions in the 6-point action plan is increased transparency and accountability of the way we provide digital services. So the goal there is to publish more information, not just about resilience and reliability, but also about performance and cost and availability, etc. I think we have multiple duties as government. One duty is, as Alexander said, is obviously to keep our citizens safe, and part of keeping our citizens safe is to be transparent with them about the threats they face and what we are doing to achieve that. I think the other duty we have is that we're experiencing the same challenges as the rest of the economy. For perfectly good business and commercial reasons, most private organisations will not be completely transparent about the nature of cyber attacks they're experiencing or other failures. I think we can afford to be more transparent. Obviously, we don't want to give away threats and vulnerabilities and that kind of stuff, but I think we can be transparent about the kind of threats we face when we have suffered attacks, what happened and what we did to recover from it. Because I think we can give examples of how we dealt with it successfully and how we didn't. Andres mentioned mentioned rehearsals and the value of rehearsals for resilience. The worst time to find out whether you can cope with the crisis is in the middle of a crisis. Not everybody has the capacity to emulate crises, but I think we can share.
Every crisis is different.
Yeah, exactly. But we can share how we responded, and then other people can learn from that.
Alexander.
I think there's a tricky balance there. I do agree with David. I think we don't talk about successes enough when it comes to digital government. You mentioned the 50% of UK services that are not digitised, and the focus is very much on the not digitised part, but we don't talk enough about where it does work. It's the same with cyber attacks. Everyone knows about the British Library being down for however many months. Very few people know about the attacks that have been defeated. You don't want to panic people either, so I think there is something about finding the right balance of communication.
So you think that, this is a question about should we scare the public?
I think if the flip side of radical transparency, if you will, is that because we're talking about deeply technical issues, without the deep technical knowledge, people may misinterpret the information. I don't think that means you keep it to yourself, but it does mean that you need to be intentional about how you communicate these types of issues.
Madis.
I think it's not about scaring the public, it's about making it a policy topic, because if it's relevant enough, it needs to be decided about, discussed about, and it's as with this kind of topic, you need to fight for the visibility among the spectrum of different topics that are on the table. So there is this fine balance, but at the end of the day, you need to kind of communicate the relevance, and for that there needs to be transparency.
But can you do it so that, and maybe understand you can comment also, in this respect, is the private and public sector, are they different? What I mean by that? And Estonians remember that. I don't know if it was a news here also. Was it 6-7 years ago when there was a theoretical issue with our ID card, that you could penetrate it. And our government, the Estonian government, took a very transparent approach. We said publicly, in the media, this is the theoretical issue, this is what it might mean for us, this is how we're going to address it, and this is how long it's going to take. Extremely public and transparent way. At the same time, you think, all the private sector ones, they send you software updates without telling what are the loopholes. Obviously, they do it because they are fixing the loopholes. So, are private and public sector different in this respect?
I don't think so, but I would also not limit it to the software side of things. So, I mean, resilience in my head is it's a wide topic that, typically, if you're resilient, you will not really get any bonus for it. I mean, citizens don't even know about it. If you're not resilient, then this erodes trust immediately. So often it's very difficult for what both the public sector and the government is definitely challenged with is that nobody will pat you on the shoulder if you're resilient. So, but if you're not, then you might lose your job. So that's the challenge there. That it's a very dangerous not to be resilient. But also the issue is that, like fundamentally speaking, those large events, the real crisis, these are the ones that really test the resilience. Only now recently, during the recent years, we're in a state of constant emergency. There is, what we call a polo crisis, multiple large-scale crises ongoing at the same time. Currently looks like the geopolitical dimension even. Definitely everybody are now thinking about resilience much more often than it was perhaps 5 years ago. So it's easier to fund it. It's easier to make this a priority for everybody. But still, fundamentally speaking, it's a strategic communication topic, and also this, like I agree with Madis as well. It's a policy question in a sense.
On that, now I would like to come back to what I asked David you the very first question about the size and maybe also geography, politics, all the characteristics that represent a country. How different are we in this approach, given that Estonia is our neighbor is in the east, so that we have our own concerns. At the same time, the UK is an island that provides us some sort of security, let's say, feeling as well. So does it mean that also how we approach the question of resilience differs?
Good question. I'm just trying to think it through. So my instinct is, I think we face similar challenges on which are at different points on a continuum. So we're in different geographical locations. We have different countries on our borders, but we operate. I think Alexander said it, and Andrea said it. We are operating in a digitally connected, globally connected digital world. So we're living in an island. No island is a real island anymore. There's no such thing as a digital island. So I think that we are subject to the same threats. We have to think about the same threats and same challenges and same potential scenarios. But the proximity of those, I think, if I think of them in classic risk management terms, I think for all of us the impact axis is probably similar. The likelihood axis, and if we have a third dimension of time, are probably different. So I think that as each of us faces into our different challenges, some of them will be higher priority than others, but the degree to which we share our responses to those will continue to help each other.
I think David said it all. I mean, he said it at the beginning already. I mean, there are, at the core, it's the same, just the actual specific approaches might be different, but that's it. And the actual list of the challenge we have is pretty much the same.
Anders, Alexander, do you agree? Because my experience in the public sector is that what is the biggest difference between the public sector and the private sector? That in the public sector, we think that everything is equally important. In private sector, we know that some things are more important than others. You first address the most important ones, you prioritize, and then you move on.
I definitely do not think that everything is equally important. And definitely we can absolutely not think like that, but neither in private sector nor in the government. I mean, there are critical services in the government that without what the society cannot function. So I think the entire resilience strategy considers that there is a differentiation between the different types of government services and infrastructure that requires different type of strategy. Also, what is the cost of resilience? So certain services go down, that's the end of the government in essence. And but there are nice to have services and so forth. So for example, if let's say, risk of losing critical government registries can provide a significant challenge for the government to function and continuity of the state overall. So, but for example, if I don't know, certain type of social benefits do not work for some time, that erodes trust, but in reality, the might not be the end of the world. So exactly. So differentiation and also understanding the cost dimension of assuring resilience, that is definitely one of the, let's say, fundamental pillars of any type of resilience strategy.
But I mean, I totally agree. but in practical life, actually articulating this relevance is actually quite a challenge, and it almost reaches to certain kind of philosophical levels, because a lot of those relevances of a certain kind of systems actually depend on the type of the crisis. I mean, when you have like animal plague, then your registry of animals is very important. When you have a snowstorm, you have totally different. So if we want to like have like a fundamental list of what is the minimum viable government, you need to work out a methodology that actually articulates a number of different criteria and builds a kind of superset of those. And it becomes even more complex, having in mind the nature of integrating this. I mean, certain systems or registries rely on other registries to run their processes. So you need to actually start going like articulating, where do they draw the line around the number of systems if you like play this scenario that, okay, these must run.
But this is also why we require differentiation between resilience strategies. So from the state point of view, but also from individual organizations' point of view. So that's a perfectly good example where Minister of Agriculture requires a completely different set of resilience strategy that is relevant for them.
But are we doing it, and are we doing it early on? What I mean by that, in my previous job, I was in charge of also economic policy. And I remember exactly COVID time. When COVID hit, as you all remember, nobody knew exactly how long it's going to last. So that we also were working on this kind of concept. The concept was called second wave fund. That, if the second wave comes, how can make our economy, most of all, very resilient, and where we should invest immediately. And one example, I'll just give you one example, that we calculated, it's not only in Estonia, in everywhere, that the economy suffered a lot. Why? Because, the kids were at home and the parents were helping them to use schools remotely instead of working remotely. So that working hours were lost. That did not contribute to the economy. So this kind of prioritizing, I think, is important. How are we doing it? How are we doing it fast enough?
So I think leadership is about prioritization at the end of the day. And I understand where you're coming from with that distinction between the private and the public sector. Ultimately, I don't think it's that the public sector is unable to prioritize. It's that the public sector is usually unable to abandon something completely. Right? Because if there is a service in place, then getting rid of that service is not something that most people would be comfortable with, or it requires a much longer debate. When we work with political leaders, we advise them on strategy, policy, and delivery, and it starts with strategy, which is ultimately this point of prioritization. Where governments need to be, I think, is we need to do two things. One is understand that whatever constraints we face down the line are ones we're comfortable with. That we're not backing ourselves into corners that we don't want to be in. And that, to me, is a really central point about resilience and dependence on different systems. So that when a crisis does come and when something needs to go up the list of priorities very quickly, we are able to act on this. And this is the second point, which is this kind of agility of thinking, so that we have the systems in place to respond to crises, but also we have the leadership and the political will to change course as circumstances evolve, so that we prioritize the right things at the right time.
Let's try to put things into perspective. That when we compare us to everybody else, are we the benchmarks? Or are the countries in Asia doing better, or is the US doing better than us? Or we should be quite happy where we are right now in Estonia and the UK, for example?
I can't claim to have done a deep, broad survey of the world. Maybe Alex has. My perception is I see different governments, and obviously we have things like OECD and things like that to tell us how people rank digitally. I think people are doing well to different degrees on the things we have been marking governments on, digitisation of services, citizen satisfaction, accessibility of services, all that kind of stuff. I think this topic of resilience, I don't think anybody has perfectly solved it at the moment, and it's also quite difficult to rank because until you have shocks, it's difficult to see. Unsurprisingly, Ukraine is obviously demonstrating resilience in different ways to existential crises. So I don't think this is something we've really measured. I also, as I said, I don't think it's something that any particular government has perfectly solved. I think that having the kind of conversations we're having today, plus maybe there are opportunities for kind of intra-government rehearsals, testing, scenario analysis, that kind of stuff. I don't think that would necessarily tell us who's in front, but it would tell us what we need to learn from each other.
I would say there is a lot to learn from each other here. So different countries have responded to different threats differently. So certain things, yes, in Estonia have been, for example, the 2007, in essence, taught Estonia how to build cyber resilience with a very high cost efficiency. So the key lessons learned was that how to build digital public infrastructure that is where the, let's say, resilience is built in, so to say. So that in essence, there's like two different doctrines how to assure cyber resilience. So either it's secure by design, or in reality to, let's say, allow for different things to be implemented and then later on try to make them secure. So this first approach that Estonian took that required also building up a lot of the infrastructure themselves. So that's hence the X road, the identity scheme, and so forth, which in the end all contribute to the resilience in the digital realm. But then there are completely other aspects. So, for example, remote first organizations and business continuity in the wider sense and so forth. So all these, there is a lot of multiple different examples from all over the world that can be incorporated, and then still there is a lot of lessons learned to be had.
I also think that we should be humble here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not an end state; it's a process, and we should learn from anybody along the road who has something to share there.
I think a lot of the time you build resilience in response to a crisis, but that means you're well prepared to deal with that crisis that is no longer here. Whether that helps you deal with the next crisis is a different question. So you do really need to learn from others who have faced different types of challenges. And that, for me, is where that link between state capacity and resilience really does come in, because it is about the ability of the state to respond to challenges.
Maybe still, to just wrap it up somehow, and maybe pick your brains on this as well. If we would have the same panel, same seminar 1 year from now, what would be the, let's say, the issue or question that we start to question we should have done it a year ago? So what are those things that we don't want to find ourselves in a year's time asking ourselves we should have?
I'm always hesitant about predicting the future, but if I've got, I think we would be, we'd be sitting here wishing that we had responded more quickly and holistically to an escalating level of cyber threat. I think we're starting to see, I think we know we've been in a hostile environment for some time. This may just be coincidence, but we're seeing, for example, in the UK at the moment, a series of attacks on our retail sector, which all happen to be causing quite widespread disruption that's highly visible to members of the public. It feels like we're entering probably a new era of more pervasive, frequent cyber threats. And I think our ability to respond to those, not just to have the defences in place which deter them, but our ability to respond well to them. To be honest, that's been imperative for years. It just feels like there's a gear shift happening at the moment, and I think we need to make sure we respond to that.
Alexander?
I would say that the most urgent task I see is around fixing legacy data infrastructure in the UK and investing as much as we can right now into moving to a fully interoperable system, prioritising, taking data sets which are stuck in legacy systems, linking them with each other, having a clear, safe, secure way of doing this in a way that does protect us against future cyber attacks as well, because that creates a modern foundation for anything else that we want to do. And so the risk is if you run ahead with things without having the foundations in place, you will then regret not having done the foundations. And that is maybe something that slows down progress on a few things, but certainly accelerates it over the longer term.
Madis.
I think a large part of the equation is your overall organizational capability. I mean, even when we change the architecture, we probably will meet new risks, and then we need to be ready for them as well. And whatever we do, we need to be able to adapt and change and react to those. It's a new world we are moving into, and I think we really probably need to be very well aware of what it takes to actually get there.
If I think through that, most of the governments in the world, let's say if there is a common denominator, what is the outcomes for digital agendas? It's typically what is mostly mentioned is efficiency and trust, which is all very right. What I hope is that more and more increasingly there will be a third pillar, which is resilience.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these excellent speakers. I think what we all learned, at least I did, is that resilience is important. It's a daily affair. We should talk about that more. There is no one-size-fits-all approach, so collaboration is paramount. We need to learn from each other. No one is safe, so better be prepared. But at the same time, I think at least we're talking about that, about resilience. This concerns us all. So let's discuss it, let's plan for it, and let's execute everything we have planned. So thank you for listening, thank you for watching. Let's be resilient.